They said I stole $50,000. My father's finger stabbed the air. His voice thundered, "Return the money or don't come home." My sister leaned in, eyes sharp, spitting, "You took Mom's savings, we all know." For years I had worked 2 jobs, drained my account, and poured everything into them, believing sacrifice was love. That night I felt the ground shift beneath me. The people I trusted most had turned me into a criminal. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I placed the teller slips on the table one by one, and their faces went pale. The phone rang at 2 in the morning, its shrill echo cutting through the quiet of my small apartment. I didn't even need to check the caller ID. I knew it was her. My mother's voice, soft yet trembling with practiced frailty, spilled through the line. "Rachel, honey, could you help us again? Just a little this time. Your father's heart medication, your sister's bills. We wouldn't ask if it weren't urgent." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, smiling through the tears gathering in my eyes. Love, I told myself, this is love. Families look after each other, and my worth was measured by how much I could give. For years, I had been conditioned to see sacrifice as loyalty. If I worked late, if I drained my savings, if I put off vacations or clothes or even dental visits, it was proof of my devotion. Trauma bonding doesn't arrive with shackles. It arrives wrapped in warmth, disguised as duty. Each plea for help, each dramatic sigh from my mother felt like a test. Pass it, and I was a good daughter. Fail it, and I was selfish. I remember how my father used to praise me in front of relatives when I was a child. "Rachel's the reliable one," he would say, his hand heavy on my shoulder. Those words were honey to me. In a house where love was scarce, being the reliable one was my ticket to affection. I clung to it, even when the requests became demands, even when gratitude turned into expectation. I convinced myself it was still love. But love, real love, doesn't demand endless sacrifice without return. It doesn't bleed you dry and call it devotion. It took me decades to admit that what I thought was loyalty was in truth control, and that my generosity was not a gift freely given. It was a chain they tightened every time I answered the phone. Still, I ignored the weight of those chains. I told myself every family had struggles. That guilt in my stomach was just proof I cared too much. Looking back, I see the small betrayals I brushed aside. My sister taking credit for the money I sent home. My father dismissing my exhaustion with a wave of his hand. My mother crying louder when I hesitated, as if my pause alone was cruelty. There are signs, I know that now. 7 of them, burned into me like scars. Gaslighting. "We never asked you for that much, you're exaggerating." Guilt tripping. "If you loved us, you'd understand." Silent treatment. Days of cold distance whenever I said no. I saw them all, yet I chose blindness, because sometimes blindness feels safer than truth. The sharpest cut came years later, wrapped in legal papers. My mother once whispered, "Don't worry, you'll always be in my will. I'd never forget what you've done." I clung to that promise, not for the money, but for the acknowledgement, proof that my sacrifices mattered. Then one day, in a hushed conversation overheard by accident, I learned the truth. My name had been erased, quietly, deliberately, replaced by the very people who accused me of selfishness. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you refused to see the obvious? That was me, the loyal daughter, the giver, the dependable one. I wore my devotion like armor, not realizing it was a costume they forced upon me. Behind every thank you, behind every we need you, there was a ledger keeping score, and I was always in debt. Anger simmered beneath my ribs, rising each time I discovered another manipulation. Yet I swallowed it. I told myself that anger would make me ungrateful, bitter, unlovable. So I smiled through tears, sent more money, sacrificed more time, until the day came when anger was no longer a secret ember. It was a roaring fire I could not ignore. And then came the night they put me on trial. The dining room was warm with the glow of candles, laughter echoing against the walls just minutes before. Then silence fell, heavy and suffocating. My father's voice sliced through it like a blade. His finger jabbed toward me, his face twisted with fury. "Return the $50,000 or don't come back." His words thundered, ricocheting through my chest. The room blurred. My heart pounded so violently it drowned out everything else. My hands trembled beneath the table, my throat constricted, and a sudden dizziness swept over me. I tried to breathe, but every inhale felt like shards of glass scraping through my ribs. And then my sister joined in. "You took Mom's savings, we all know." Her eyes gleamed with a satisfaction that chilled me to the bone. I searched for my mother. For 36 years, I had believed she would be my shield. Her eyes met mine for a fleeting second, then dropped. She stared at the tablecloth, her lips pressed thin, her silence sealing my sentence. That silence was louder than my father's accusations. It was betrayal without a word. Every instinct screamed at me to defend myself, to shout back, to demand proof. But instead, I stayed still. My lips refused to move, my body frozen. To them, it looked like guilt. To me, it was something else. It was the moment I saw the battlefield clearly for the first time. I locked my gaze on my father, his face red with anger, his fist clenched. Inside, my thoughts whispered words I never dared speak aloud. "You just declared war." The meal ended in fractured murmurs, the laughter that had once filled the room, now replaced by suspicion and scorn. Plates went untouched, silverware clinked nervously. And I sat there, the accused, marked as the thief among them. Later, in the dark sanctuary of my car, the facade broke. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, and tears cascaded down my cheeks. The sobs came in waves, gut-wrenching, raw. For years I had been their scapegoat, the one to blame when things went wrong, the one to sacrifice when debts came due. But that night, as the echoes of my father's command replayed in my head, I whispered to the empty car, "I'm done being their scapegoat." It was not resignation, it was resolve. I realized that words meant nothing in a family built on lies. If I protested, they'd twist it. If I cried, they'd call me dramatic. If I shouted, they'd call me unstable. So I chose silence, not because I was guilty, but because silence was my weapon. The car's interior still smelled faintly of coffee and worn leather, the same space where I'd sung along to the radio countless times. Now it was a confessional. My tears fell onto the steering wheel as I drew a shaky breath and whispered, "I won't fight them with words. I'll fight them with proof." That decision shifted everything. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was planning. They thought my silence was weakness, that my bowed head meant defeat. Let them believe it. Their certainty would be my camouflage. And I ask you, what would you do? Would you fight back with words that would vanish into their denial? Or would you wait, patient and steady, until proof could speak louder than your voice ever could? As I drove away from that house, the cold night air seeping through the cracked window. I felt the anger inside me crystallize into something sharper. My father's accusation wasn't just a wound. It was the line that divided who I had been from who I was becoming. From that night, I stopped being their victim. I became their mirror. I began with the files I had tucked away over the years. Bank statements, receipts, teller slips I had kept more out of habit than suspicion. I spread them across my kitchen table like puzzle pieces waiting for a picture to emerge. The numbers, the dates, the signatures, they spoke louder than any argument ever could. My father's handwriting, my sister's initials, withdrawals that matched none of my actions. The $50,000 they accused me of stealing had never touched my account. It had slipped quietly into theirs. I sat back, my chest tightening, the papers blurring as tears threatened to spill. I pressed my hands against my face, forcing myself to breathe. It wasn't just that they had taken the money. It was that my mother knew. Her signature appeared next to theirs, her silent approval inked in black and white. She had stood beside me at the dinner table, letting them brand me a thief, while all along she had known the truth. My heart broke in a new way. I tried to steady my shaking hands, gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles burned. For so long I had imagined her as my ally. In reality, she had been the quiet accomplice. That realization left me gasping, like the floor had given out beneath me. But the deeper I dug, the more the betrayal multiplied. One folder revealed not only the stolen $50,000, but something worse, a loan, taken out in my name, signed with a shaky but unmistakable version of my signature. My stomach dropped. They hadn't just accused me of theft. They had built a trap that could ruin me, debt I had never taken, a crime I had never committed. I traced the pen strokes, my pulse thundering in my ears. It wasn't just betrayal, it was sabotage. My whisper filled the empty room. I wasn't just accused, I was set up. The weight was crushing, but despair was no longer an option. I needed help. The next morning, I reached out to 3 people I trusted outside the toxic circle of my family. First, an attorney I'd once met at a community workshop. His voice on the line was calm, measured. "Rachel, don't panic. Bring me everything you've got. Paper doesn't lie." Next, I called Emma, a friend who worked at a local bank. She agreed to meet me after hours, her eyes widening as she scanned the slips and loan documents. "Rachel, this is serious. They forged this. You could have been held liable if no one caught it." She promised to discreetly pull more records. Finally, I sat across from my therapist, the weight of months pouring out in halting words. She didn't give me solutions, but she gave me strength. "You're not crazy," she said softly. "This is abuse, and you're taking back your power." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't drowning alone. Then an unexpected ally appeared. My aunt, my father's own sister, called me after hearing whispers of the accusations. Her voice cracked as she confessed, "Rachel, your father did the same to me years ago. He manipulated me, drained me dry, and when I had nothing left, he turned the family against me too." Her words were a mirror of my pain. For the first time, I saw the pattern not as my shame, but as his legacy. The relief was fragile, but it was real. I wasn't the only one. I wasn't the first, and maybe I could be the last. My attorney uncovered something even darker. He leaned across his desk, sliding a document toward me. "Your father is preparing to sign over your mother's house, without her knowledge. If he succeeds, she loses everything, and given her silence, she may not fight him. My chest tightened. It wasn't just about me anymore. Their betrayal was expanding, swallowing everything in its path. I stared at the papers, the enormity pressing down on me. This was no longer only about clearing my name. It was about stopping them from destroying whatever remained of our family's future. The stakes had shifted, and my silence had turned into something sharper, something they didn't expect. Now it wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about stopping a theft in progress. Christmas lights twinkled against the frosted windows, casting a glow that felt almost cruel in its cheerfulness. The entire family had gathered, plates stacked high, carols playing softly in the background. Laughter bubbled around me, but it was hollow, rehearsed, the kind that hides rot beneath polished silver. My pulse hammered as I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin stack of papers. Teller slips, bank statements, proof. I placed them in the center of the table with deliberate calm. Conversations faltered. Forks clinked against porcelain, then stilled. My father's face drained of color, his lips parting soundlessly. My sister leaned forward, scanning the slips, her smirk faltering into something jagged. "This isn't," she began, but the words caught in her throat. She staggered suddenly, pressing a hand to her forehead, her body slumping against the chair. Gasps erupted. "She's fainting," someone cried. My aunt half rose from her seat, panic rippling through the room. My sister had always been dramatic, but now she was weaponizing it. I didn't move. I let the act unravel, my eyes steady on her trembling figure. Then, with quiet precision, I pulled my phone from my pocket and pressed play. My father's voice filled the air, harsh and undeniable. "I had no choice. I had to take the money to cover my debts. Rachel will never know. We'll tell her it's her fault." The room froze. Every inhale seemed to stop, suspended in the weight of those words. My sister's eyes flicked open, her face pale, not from her feigned faint, but from the recording. The chaos erupted instantly. Shouts, denials, accusations flying like shards of glass. My mother's hands trembled against her lap, her gaze locked on her plate. And me? I sat still, the eye of the storm as their world began to fracture. But when the room erupted, I realized the real game had just begun. In the days that followed, the counterattack was swift. They launched their smear campaign with ruthless precision. Relatives called me, voices dripping with pity or contempt. "Rachel, how could you do this to your family?" Social media posts painted me as the ungrateful daughter, the betrayer who had tried to destroy Christmas. The worst blow came when my phone buzzed with a call from a coworker. "Rachel, is it true? Did you steal from your parents?" My knees buckled, the walls closing in. At work, I was respected, dependable. Now even there, their poison had seeped in. Alone in my apartment, I pressed the phone to my chest, tears burning hot. For a moment, I nearly broke. But then Emma, my friend at the bank, sent me an envelope. Inside were documents, pristine and devastating, proof that my father had taken out loans under my name. My signature, forged with clumsy precision. My debt, created by his hand. The betrayal cut deeper than any accusation. It wasn't enough for them to strip me of dignity. They wanted to bury me in ruin. And I ask you, if your own blood framed you for debt, would you still call them family? The rage that followed wasn't wild. It was sharpened into steel. They thought they had cornered me, that shame would silence me. But shame was no longer mine to carry. They wanted to bury me, but they forgot. I kept the shovel. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a place where truth and lies often collided. I sat beside my attorney, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Across the room, my father's jaw clenched, my sister whispering furiously into his ear. My mother sat a step behind them, her gaze fixed on the floor. When my lawyer rose, his voice was calm, deliberate. We present irrefutable evidence that my client, Rachel, did not take $50,000 from her family. In fact, the withdrawals were authorized by her father and sister. Furthermore, documents prove a loan was fraudulently signed under Rachel's name, placing her in false debt. He laid the papers down. Teller slips, signatures, the recording of my father's voice, all of it laid bare. The judge's eyes scanned the evidence, his brow furrowing. My father's face paled. My sister fidgeted with her hands, her confidence crumbling. The ruling was clear. I was innocent. The loans would be investigated and my liability erased. In that instant, the chains that had bound me for decades cracked. The whispers that had followed me, the doubt, the shame, all shattered under the weight of truth. But victory had its own bitter edge. My father's reputation collapsed almost overnight. A man once respected for his community work, now whispered about in grocery stores, avoided at church. My sister, who had clung so fiercely to the promise of inheritance, was cut from the will by legal intervention. And then my mother came to me. Her voice was hushed, desperate. "Rachel, please, forgive us. Don't let this destroy the family. People are watching." Her plea wasn't about me. It wasn't about justice. It was about image, about covering the scandal. The words sliced through me, sharper than any accusation. For years, I had prayed she would defend me, just once, protect me as a mother should. Now I saw clearly, she never would. Her silence had always been her answer. My chest tightened, grief swelling in waves. Yet when I opened my mouth, the words came steady, quiet. "No, Mom. For the first time, I say no." For the first time, I said no to my mother. The night air outside was crisp as I sat on my balcony, the city lights blinking in the distance. For the first time in months, I breathed without a weight crushing my chest. The silence was no longer suffocating, it was healing. I leaned back, exhaling, feeling the tremors of freedom ripple through me. Justice hadn't brought joy, not yet, but it had brought release. Then came the knock. My aunt stood at my door, her expression soft. She wasn't alone. Behind her were two cousins, faces pale but resolute. "Rachel," my aunt said, her voice trembling, "you're not the only one. He did this to us, too. Manipulated, stole, lied. We've all carried it alone, until now." The revelation stunned me. All those years, I believed I was isolated, singled out. In truth, I had been part of a cycle, one that stretched across generations. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I had been fighting for all of us. And I ask you, if the wounds of betrayal spread wider than your own, would you walk away or fight for them too? The fire that had once been rage settled now into something steadier. Empowerment, closure. I wasn't just free from their accusations. I was stronger, forged in betrayal and tempered in truth. Justice wasn't the ending. It was the door to something greater. The silence in my apartment was no longer suffocating. It was mine. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring at 2 a.m, wasn't bracing for another demand masked as love. I had drawn my lines, sharp and clear. No contact with my father and sister, low contact with my mother. Boundaries that once felt impossible now stood like walls protecting my peace. I remember sitting alone on the couch, a cup of tea warming my hands. The air was still, calm. I glanced around the modest apartment, bare in places, yet alive with something new, freedom. A smile crept across my face, not from joy but from relief. The weight had lifted. For the first time, I felt light. Then came the letter. The envelope lay on my doorstep, my father's handwriting scrawled across it. My stomach clenched as I picked it up. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I could already hear the words inside. Pleas for money, excuses, promises wrapped in guilt. I struck a match and held it to the corner. The paper curled, flames devouring the ink. I watched until it turned to ash, and for once, silence was power. Life after betrayal was not easy, but it was real. I poured myself into work, no longer distracted by endless obligations. Projects flourished, promotions came, and colleagues saw me not as the dependable caretaker, but as a leader in my own right. My career became not just survival, but growth. Friendship, too, took on new meaning. I built a circle of people who valued me not for what I gave, but for who I was. Dinners with friends replaced strained family gatherings. Laughter returned, genuine and unburdened. I began to understand what family could be when chosen rather than forced. There were moments of ache, of course, holidays where the absence was sharp, reminders of the bonds I had severed. But even in those moments, I felt stronger. The ache was not weakness, it was proof of healing. Over time, something unexpected happened. People reached out, colleagues, acquaintances, even strangers who had heard fragments of my story. They whispered confessions of their own toxic families, their own betrayals. I listened. I guided them toward resources, shared my journey when they asked. Slowly, I became more than a survivor. I became a voice, a mentor, a light in the darkness others still lived in. The twist of fate was not that I had lost a family, it was that I had gained one. A community of the wounded and the healing, bound not by blood, but by truth. Would you believe that after everything, I no longer longed for their approval? The girl who once wept at being erased from a will now stood tall, building her own legacy with every step forward. One evening, I stood before the house I had just purchased. Not grand, not extravagant, but wholly mine. The keys felt heavy in my hand, weighted with every sacrifice, every betrayal, every victory. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and whispered to the empty rooms, "This is not revenge. This is rebirth." And so the journey ended, not in bitterness, but in freedom, not in vengeance, but in transformation. What they tried to destroy became the foundation of who I was meant to be. I survived, and then I thrived.